Hey guys, back again to go into ecology. So, we are starting a whole new unit and a whole new set of standards with ecology. So, we are looking at Georgia Standard of Excellence SB 5, which is to obtain, evaluate, and communicate information to assess the interdependence of all organisms on one another and their environment. So, SB 5B is what we are focusing on today, and that is going to allow us to develop and use models to analyze the cycling of matter and the flow of energy within ecosystems through the processes of photosynthesis and respiration. And we should be able to arrange components in a food web according to energy flow. We should be able to compare the quantity of energy in the steps of an energy pyramid. We should be able to explain the need for the cycling of major biochemical elements, things like carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and hydrogen. And our goals for today are to be able to compare and contrast biotic and abiotic factors in an ecosystem, and then also to arrange components of a food web according to energy flow, be able to explain the quantity of energy and the major steps of an energy pyramid, and explain the need for cycling of major biochemical elements. So let's think about ecology. Let's break this down. Ecology is a really important word, and the suffix ology means the study of something. The prefix eco comes from the Greek word oikos, and oikos means home. So ecology is the study of a habitat or a home. So the biosphere includes all of the organisms and the environments they live in. This is both biotic and abiotic factors. I want you to think for a minute about what biotic factors and abiotic factors are. So this word biotic, bio being in there probably means living. So biotic factors are factors that are living or at one time were alive. Abiotic factors are things that are non-living, things that have never been alive. So biotic means living, abiotic means non-living. We know that organisms adapt to survive in their particular environments. So penguins are adapted to live in very cold tundras, while ostriches, on the other hand, are adapted to live in very hot, very dry savanna locations. And these adaptations are useful for obtaining food, protection, and reproduction, among many, many, many other things. If we were to take penguins and transport them to the savannah and try to have them survive, they're probably not going to live very long because that's not where they're adapted to live. Same thing with ostriches going to the cold tundras. So I want you to think about some examples of biotic and abiotic organisms, or not organisms, I'm sorry, biotic and abiotic things. And we're going to give you some in the video, but we're also going to talk about this in class as well. So be thinking about what might be some examples of living things and what might be some examples of non-living things. So let's check out this video first.
How many different types of organisms do you see in this picture? Or how many different living and non-living items do you see in this picture? As you study these pictures, you begin to get a clue about what ecology is all about. Welcome to Moo Moo Math and Science, and what is ecology? Ecology is the study of how organisms interact with one another and with their physical environment. Ecology isn't just about rainforests or other types of forests. Have you seen mold grow on bread? Or mushrooms grow on rotting logs? Or watched ants search for food? If so, you have seen examples of ecology in action. One goal of ecology is to understand the distribution and variety of living things in their physical environment. For instance, you will find different living and non-living objects in the desert, compared to a coral reef, compared to your backyard. These differences in nature are driven by interactions among living organisms as well as between organisms and their physical environment. As an example, let's go back to the mold growing on bread. Mold is more likely to appear on bread than, say, a rock. Why might this be the case? Well, maybe the mold needs certain nutrients to grow, and these nutrients are found on the bread and not on the rock. You can classify these interactions as either biotic, which means living organisms, and abiotic, which are non living objects. Ants, dogs, fish, mushrooms, plants, and this praying mantis are examples of biotic factors. Clouds, sunshine, water, and diamonds would be examples of abiotic factors.
All right, guys. So as you can see from the video, if it's alive, if it has those characteristics of living organisms, it's going to count as biotic. If it does not meet all of those characteristics, like a rock, it is an abiotic factor. So let's talk about organization. So if we look at this, organization is pretty involved. We go all the way from organism over here up and around to the biosphere. So organisms are super specific. The biosphere is very broad, it's very generalized. So an organism, when we have lots of the same organism together, they make up a population. Populations of multiple different organisms make up a community. An organism, a community of organisms, and the abiotic factors like the clouds, like the air, like the rocks, etc. That makes up an ecosystem. So it's all the communities and the area that they live in that's abiotic. Biomes are areas that have similar ecosystems or similar vegetation and similar weather patterns and things like that. And then all of the biomes. All right, guys. So you can remember that order of organization by remembering this sentence: old people can't eat bad beef. So we can look at all of the different levels of organization. Organism is a single individual. Population is all the individuals of the same species living in the same place at the same time. So your family is an example of a population. A community is all living organisms in that same place at the same time. So in my house, the community would be made up of my family, myself, my husband, my 3 kids, but also our leopard gecko, our 3 cats, our 4 dogs. They're all going to be together as a part of the community. The ecosystem is all living organisms and their specific abiotic environment. Biomes, of course, are the specific environment like the tundra, the savanna, the deciduous forest, the rainforest, etc. And the biosphere is the entire planet because it's made up of all of the living things on Earth.
Ecology can be studied at 5 broad levels: the organism, population, community, ecosystem, and biosphere. Let's take a look at each level. Organism. An organism can range from a single protus to a large animal like an elephant. Population is a group of organisms of the same species that live in the same area at the same time. A community. A biological community consists of all the populations of different species that live in a given area. An ecosystem consists of all the organisms in an area, the community, and the abiotic factors that influence the community. And biosphere. This is planet Earth, viewed as an ecological system. So in summary, ecology is the study of how organisms interact with one another and their physical environment. And remember, kindness always multiplies kindness.
All right, you guys. So next we're going to talk about niche or niche and habitat. That's weird. Okay. So a niche includes not only what the organism eats, but also where it feeds and how it affects the energy flow in an ecosystem. I think of it as like the job that the species has in the community, because all different species occupy a different niche or have a different job or role in that community. And then habitat is the place where the organism actually lives. So several species might share a habitat, like um, um, like a gopher tortoise They dig a hole, and lots of different organisms can live in that den that the gopher tortoise digs. But each of those organisms that live there have a different food source or a different resource that they need. So the habitat resources can allow it to be divided into several different niches or several different jobs.
Welcome to Moo Math and Science. In this video, I'd like to talk about habitat and niche. A habitat is an ecological area where a plant, animal, or individual lives. It may be an island, a tree, or even a rock ledge. The habitat is where an individual can find food, shelter, protection, and mates. A niche is the role, job, or position that an individual has in its environment. A niche may also include what the individual eats, how it interacts with other living things, and also how it interacts with non-living factors. I'll give you two examples. First, I've taught at the same school for many years, and even the same room for most of these years. This would be my habitat. I teach life science at this building, so this would be my niche. Miss English teaches English, and Mr. K teaches social studies. Each of those are their niche. We all live in the same habitat, and we have our own niche. Let's take a look at a real-world example. The Galapagos Islands are islands located roughly 600 miles west of South America. There are several types of finches, a type of bird that lives on these islands. Their habitat would be the Galapagos Islands. However, the different finches have their own niches. They each eat different types of food. The warbler finch has a thin beak for eating insects. A ground finch has a short beak for eating seeds left on the ground. And a cactus finch eat cacti seeds. Each finch has their own niche that allows them to survive and prosper in the same habitat as the other niches. So there we go, ecological habitat and niche. Thanks for watching, and Moo Math uploads a new math and science video every day. Please.
All right. So typically, when we're looking at these jobs, these resources, we think about what organisms feed on. So in real ecosystems, most of the time consumers feed on more than one type of organism. And most organisms are eaten by more than one type of consumer. So you can see here, I've got an example of a food web. It starts out looking kind of like a food chain and then kind of branches off. So this complex network of interconnected food chains is known as a food web. So I want you to think about, what role do producers, consumers, and decomposers play in a food web? And also think about, is one organism more important than the others? But you can see, if we look at this, we start with the sun. All of the energy on the planet comes from the sun ultimately, because it has to be absorbed by the plants and processed into something that us animals can use. So those of us who are heterotrophs, all types of animals, have to be able to utilize the energy that comes from the sun. So producers are the ones that make that energy. Consumers are ones who eat that energy, and then decomposers are ones that break down the dead consumers or producers and put nutrients back into the food web. So I want you to think about if one type of organism is any more important than the others in this process, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in class. Now, we also have to talk about energy pyramids. So this is a food web. We also have energy pyramids, and it really isn't a pyramid, because you'll notice with our rule of 10, only about 10% of the energy is passing on to the next level. So we start with 1,000,000 kilocalories of sunlight, sorry, and then the producers make 10,000 kilocalories of energy. They pass on to primary consumers 1,000 kilocalories, which is 10% of the energy produced by the plants. And then the secondary consumers get 100 kilocalories, which is 10% of the energy produced by the primary consumers. And then the tertiaries get 10 kilocalories, which is 10% of what's produced by the secondary consumers. And what happens is that energy gets lost. It either is processed and used, or it gets lost as heat and goes off into the atmosphere. But 90% of the energy from the level before it is lost or used up in the following level. So let's see what the amoeba sisters have to say about food webs and energy pyramids.
When we were little, we loved nature shows. One reason was because we didn't have cable, and it was one of the few things we actually got a TV signal for that didn't require you to dance around with a TV antenna for reception. But the other reason was that, of course, it was cool science. It often showed animals that we couldn't see in our own backyard doing some awesome things. But then it would be a little traumatizing when, inevitably, some predator would walk in and gobble the unsuspecting animal up. Truly, action scenes with predators and prey are often shown in nature shows because it's all part of nature's food chains. A food chain starts with a producer. A producer is an organism that is an autotroph, which means that it makes its own food. A plant, for example. The plant is eaten by a primary consumer, this grasshopper here. Consumers are heterotrophs, which means that they need to feed on other organisms. The primary consumer is eaten by a secondary consumer, this frog. The secondary consumer is eaten by a tertiary consumer, this snake, and the food chain can keep going. Notice how the arrows are supposed to point in the direction of the one doing the eating, which makes sense because that's the direction of the energy flow. You can also arrange this same food chain into an energy pyramid. The producers are at the base here in trophic level 1. They actually contain the most energy. What is crazy to think about is the primary consumers here in trophic level 2, they actually only store 10% of the energy from the producers. Meaning, let's say the plants here had 10,000 kilocalories. That's an energy unit of energy. Well, the next level here, the primary consumers in trophic level 2, they would only store 1,000 kilocalories of energy. So where did the rest of the energy go? Much of it is lost in heat or undigested. If you go up to the secondary consumers in trophic level 3, that would be only 100 kilocalories of energy. So as you go up each trophic level, it's roughly only 10% of the energy from the trophic level below that will be stored. Back to our food chain. Notice that, like a domino effect, if something is removed, let's say the grasshoppers, you can harm the others because they might not have enough to eat. You really have to consider the relationships among organisms in a food chain. In fact, even if you took out the apex predator in this particular food chain, which is the snake, you could end up with an excessive population of frogs, and so many frogs that it's possible they wouldn't have enough grasshoppers to even support them. You know, this is actually not a very good model because in real life, this snake probably doesn't just eat frogs. It probably eats rabbits and birds too, because an ecosystem doesn't typically have a single food chain. Instead, it has more of a food web. A food web is made up of multiple food chains that interact together. So notice how now we have multiple food chains here tied in with our original to make a food web. The beauty of a food web is that it shows more interactions among a variety of producers and various level consumers. It also can show biodiversity. Biodiversity is the variety of organisms, all types of organisms, living in a given area. The size of the area that we're talking about, as well as the climate of the area, directly affect the biodiversity that is present. Biodiversity can contribute to the sustainability of an ecosystem. What I mean by that is, let's say there was a decrease in the amount of small birds in this food web. Well, it's likely that will be harmful to other organisms. However, it is not the only thing that the snakes feed on. They have other options because of the biodiversity. The snakes also eat rabbits and they eat frogs. So, because of this biodiversity, the ecosystem might be more resilient to changes such as these and possibly recover. However, these changes can still have detrimental effects, and it's why it's critical to protect ecosystem biodiversity. High biodiversity has a lot of other benefits. They can include economics, and we'll need another video to really touch on all the benefits of high biodiversity. So, if we were to ask you which of our examples here had more biodiversity, our food chain here or our food web, you would definitely want to pick the food web. One last thing, there are some organisms that we left out of our food webs and food chains, but they're kind of a big deal. Decomposers. Decomposers are heterotrophs since they do eat other things, even if the things they're eating are dead. Decomposers include organisms like bacteria and fungus. Technically, if we were to draw them in, then every arrow here would eventually point to them. Well, that's it for the Amoeba Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.
All right, guys. That is everything that I have for you for this presentation with our introduction to ecology. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you for our next class session coming up soon. Bye, guys.